Welcome. Today we'll be sharing a shocking NDE of a woman who crossed over, went to heaven, and discovered the secret of co-creation. I'm your host, AJ Parr, and this is the near-death experience of Katie Petty. So sit back and prepare yourself for a story that is bound to blow your mind.
There was a huge staircase. It was absolutely beautiful. There were large green pillars. Everything was telepathic there. I could hear literally all of these, maybe hundreds of people or more, all at one time. But I knew exactly when my guide was speaking to me or I was speaking, so it was all telepathic. But the biggest lesson in that room and zooming into all of these different people's lives was that at every moment, we're always creating and we're co-creating. My first experience with the light was in 1997. I was about 17 years old in high school. I had been sick with an upper respiratory type infection for about a week. And I just stayed home from school thinking I would get better, but I didn't. I continually got worse. And the day that I experienced the light, I was in my room in extreme pain. I had a lot of infection, high fever. I knew that I felt like I was dying. And I decided that I was going to surrender to the death. And so I told God that it was okay if he took me. And I asked that I would at least be able to speak to one person before I died. And instantly a bright golden, white, pure, beautiful light enveloped me, came into my room. All pain was gone. All fear was gone. I felt amazing. And the love just enveloped me. It was like nothing I had ever felt before. About that time, my mom came home from work to take me to the hospital. And so, that experience kind of came real fast, ended real fast. I ended up having 107 temperature, pneumonia. I was in the hospital for a week. So that was just a little experience. In 2011 is when I had my, what I'll call a near-death experience. I had found out that I had a big kind of grapefruit-sized tumor that was connected to my ovaries. And I needed to have it removed or it could have turned into cancer. And so I scheduled the surgery. 2 days prior to that scheduled surgery in 2011, I had my first telepathic message come through to me. I don't know if it was an angel. It was just a voice that came to me and said, "You're going to go to heaven, but don't worry, you won't die." And I had never, heard in spirit before. And so it kind of freaked me out. I wasn't sure, was this my mind? Like, what's going on here? And so I didn't think much of it. The surgery came. At the time, I was on amphetamine, which is Adderall. I was on large doses of it. I was kind of in an addicted state. I didn't stop taking the medication prior to the surgery. And as the nurses were putting me to sleep, they were having a hard time. They were telling me to count backwards, and I wasn't, I just kept counting and counting. And so they had to administer more of the medicine. That was kind of the only thing that I was aware of that was going on. So I had the surgery. I woke up. I had memories of kind of this white, cream sterile room. I remember there being people kind of sitting or standing next to me. I remember, kind of having that awareness that there were lots of people around me during the surgery. A little while after the surgery, I had a complete download of my trip to heaven. At the time, I instinctively grabbed my laptop and started typing away of the remembrance. And I just appeared in this very large and kind of similar to like a very fancy, nice hotel lobby. The walls were kind of cream white. Um, it had kind of an ambiance to it. The lighting was not dim, but it was very beautiful, golden. Um, there was a huge staircase. It was absolutely beautiful. There were large cream pillars. Um, I would say the room was probably 4,000 square feet. It was huge. There were people walking, normal looking people. They were not walking, but they were gliding everywhere, moving around. It was very busy. And when I first arrived, um, I'm going to call her my guide. She was a woman. There were a lot of women. But my guide came up to me and she communicated happiness, joy, warmth, love. She knew me. All of these people knew me, but I couldn't remember them. The thing that I'm not sure, but I haven't quite figured it out yet. But there was a friend that when I first saw my guide, and she communicated, happiness, celebration type feeling of seeing me. A friend that was at the time alive and is still alive, she was there. And she walked up to me and she wanted to go with me and my guide lady. And my guide looked at her and said, "I'm sorry, you can't go where Katie's going." And so now I kind of understand that we each have our own level of, where we're going to go to in heaven. Maybe based on our consciousness, I'm not quite sure, but it was very apparent to me that she wasn't going to be on the same level as I was. And so there were rooms, there were doors, just regular looking doors. Off to my left was a door that was shut, and through the door was this bright, bright, bright white golden light, brighter than any light that was present in this place. And I never thought to go through it, but I knew that it was definitely God's light. So the first room that me and my guide glided over to, let me back up and say that everything was telepathic there. We didn't use our words. We didn't use our mouths to speak. I could hear literally all of these, maybe hundreds of people or more, all at one time, but I knew exactly when my guide was speaking to me or I was speaking, so it was all telepathic. So we walk into the first room and there were big, huge, long tables spread throughout this room. And there was a man in there and he was dressed in like this big, long, white kind of gown looking thing. I never spoke to him, but on the tables I was told that there were all types of things to be created and used throughout this realm that I was in. And we walked up to a table and there were, I wouldn't say tapestries, but they were big, maybe like 6 or 8 foot long piles of fabric. And again, I knew that they were to be used in this realm. And so my guide told me that I could touch it. And when I put my hand on the fabric, it was exquisite feeling. It was very soft. It was alive. And my mind zoomed into it and I kind of became one with this fabric. I can see shimmers of life in each thread. And so after that, my guide told me that we were going to go up to another room. And we just thought, made the intent to leave that room and go to another up in the building. And we were there. Even though there was a staircase, we didn't use the staircase. We just appeared into another room. And this room was not like the other, not like the marble pillars and that type of a look. It was kind of sterile, like a classroom. There were people sitting in chairs with desks. And at the head of the front of the class was a man standing there. I went up to the front of the class and turned around to look at the class. And there was a big, long, maybe 3-foot line. It was like a yellow line. I was on one side of it on the floor. I was on the other side of me was a dog appeared, and it was a large breed dog. I knew this to be a simulation of sorts because it was like the dog just appeared. It was, the dog was scared. It was mean. It wasn't scary to me because I knew it was simulation, but the dog was in pain. It was hurting. It was fearful. It reminded me of the earthen realm. And I instinctively put my hand over the dog's head, not touching it, but over the dog's head. And it instantly was soothed. It was instantly healed of his pain, of his terror, all of that. After that, we left to another part of the building. And this was it was a room, but it was just like a black, empty space that went on forever and ever. And I could see in different areas, there was like a scene going on, and they were humans. I was able to zoom into each one of these experiences going on with this human. They were all different. I don't remember all of them, but I knew that this was a space for students and masters. So people on various levels and degrees of consciousness, their ability to create, they were all creating. One was somebody that I knew on Earth, and he was an artist. There were sketches. He was creating chalk art. And I knew that was the creative expression of each one of those people, their souls, kind of purpose or how they express themselves. But the biggest lesson in that room and zooming into all of these different people's lives was that at every moment, we're always creating, and we're co-creating with our soul and with God. The last one that I zoomed in was on my life, and it was in the future. It hadn't happened yet, but I saw myself climbing into this big dumpster, and I was dumpster diving. I was getting things out of the trash. I was reselling them. I was trying to, make a living basically in my future when I was homeless. I didn't know I was going to be homeless yet, but so that was the end of the story. After I saw myself, it was like poof, teleported right back, and that was the end. A little bit went by, and I received another telepathic message, and it said, "You're going to go through hard times in your future." I was given the symbol, the image of a wheelchair. And so, in my human mind, I was like, am I going to get into a wreck? Am I going to be confined to a wheelchair? And they said, you're going to go through troubled times, and you're going to have to rely on others for help. And so I was like, okay, I don't know what that all means, but, and at the time, that was only the second message that I had received from the other side. So I didn't know if it was my mind, if I was making this up. I didn't know what was happening. So my life went on, and I just kind of, had these experiences in the back of my mind, not really knowing what they were. Life went on. I started, continuing with my Adderall addiction. I was drinking heavily. I developed fibromyalgia and arthritis and just lots of pain. I was seeing pain doctors. They, on top of the Adderall that I was taking, they put me on 13 pills a day of various kinds of tramadol, nerve pain stuff, narcotics. I mean, you name it. For about 3 years that went on, and it was controlling my life. I was a zombie. I was going through very deep depression. I wanted to experience freedom in my life, and I wasn't getting it. As my addiction kind of continued on, I was having lots of trouble at home with my husband. I wasn't being the mom that I wanted to be. And I decided to quit cold turkey all of the medication, including the Adderall that I had been on for 10 years. I was completely quit. I was about 2 weeks sober, and I was introduced to methamphetamine. I found that a little bitty small crystal could instantly take my pain away. It could instantly fill up my sadness, my insecurities. It gave me hope. It gave me a new self. And I was hooked. Within two months' time, I left my family, left my husband, my 3 children. And I also left, because things were getting not good at home. There was lots of fighting, and, I was belligerent. I mean, I was on drugs, so I wanted to remove myself from the situation. And I did. I kind of couch surfed for a couple months here and there. When you're on meth, you don't sleep. I didn't. You don't eat. Your mental state goes down real quick. I ended up wrecking my car. And at that time, I had no way to go see my kids. I gave up complete hope. I was stranded about 45 minutes away from my city in Austin, Texas. And I eventually found a homeless camp that, the various people would supply me with my drugs. I lived in a tent. I was in complete hell. I'll tell you, it felt like hell. I hated myself for getting on drugs or leaving my kids. About a year into it, my world started to shift. I felt like I had a presence that was there with me, and it felt like me, but it wasn't me. I was hearing in spirit. I was hearing this presence speak to me. I would be brought up to higher states of consciousness, I'll call it. During these higher states of consciousness, I experienced the same love that I experienced in my very first encounter with the light. It was completely unconditional. It was the feeling of pure bliss and love. I will say that when you're on methamphetamine, there's a difference between the higher states of consciousness that I was experiencing and the high. The high is nothing compared to this. And these higher states of consciousness, you kind of become one with everything, and you understand from a higher level. And that's what I was experiencing. It would come and go. And when it would happen, I would begin to feel self-love for myself in a way that I'd never, ever felt. And so this kind of continued off and on. Like I said, I was hearing in spirit. I was being encouraged to better myself. I was feeling much more self-love. I then was told in spirit that I had 4 entities. They called them entities. And at the time, I was homeless. I didn't have a cell phone. I didn't have any contact with the internet or anything. And so I had no idea what entities even were. I understood that there were 4 separate entities, and each one of these entities had their own groups. I knew that they were with me. I was hearing them. It was a very, very confusing time. And I was extremely scared because I didn't know, why am I hearing these things? I felt like I was going crazy. And so I began to share energy with these entities. There were very scary moments because their frequency was very different than mine. I began a process of when I would go into these higher states of consciousness, afterwards, it was like I was filled with all of this light. But then afterwards, I would go down to darkness and the darkness would just come up. It would like bubble up, my shadow aspects, all of the pains and the hurts, even subconscious programmings. They were coming to the surface and they were leaving. And I think because I was still on this earthen plane, I was experiencing all of this and I didn't understand what it was. I now understand that I was going through a spiritual awakening. I would be told by these entities that they could see me, that they could see my actions, they could hear me, that they were in constant contact with me. And they gave me an image of this sphere in the sky. And they would say that they were inside that little sphere and that they could consciously, see me, experience me and all of that. There were times that I think that I don't know how, because I sure didn't ask for it, but I would merge with their energies and the frequency difference would be so vast. I would go into like a tranced type state. Lots of time would go by and I do not remember. I just know that I was in complete fear. I would hide. 4 or 5 hours would go by and I'm still, in this tranced state, hiding. I don't have a memory of what happened during those times. So this kind of continued. My shadow was being delivered. I was kind of being reborn, if you will, for a good maybe two years.
Wow.
I was on the streets for 3 years and it kind of ended. There was a huge snowstorm that came through Austin in 2021. And I was trying to get away, get out of the cold. And I found a hotel that was being renovated. This was during COVID. And so the hotel was being renovated. I found a door that was open and I walked in. The room was completely gutted. There was only, 2x4s on the walls, the concrete floor. There was a brand new huge garden bathtub that they had put in there and there was an empty box. And so I said, I'm going to climb in there and I'm going to get warm. And as I shut the lid over myself, I thought, I'm going to die out here on the streets. If I don't change something, I need help. I need to get to safety. And so I prayed and asked Jesus if he could help me. I asked God to come into my life and help turn it around, that I didn't want to die. I was raised a Christian. I was Christian my whole life. And so, having your typical Christian kind of outlook, I knew that my life had went into complete sin. I was separated from God. I thought, I now know that that's definitely not the case. Sin separates us from our true nature, and doing those type of things. So anyway, I asked Jesus, I asked God, and I fell asleep. The next morning, I woke up. The snow from the snowstorm was starting to melt. I ran into 2 ladies that I was very upset at this point because I just wanted off of the streets. I was scared. I was scared to death. And they came up to me and said, can we help you? And I said, yes, I need to be away from people because of all of these crazy states of consciousness, were happening. I wanted to be alone. And so they bought me a tent. We set it up. As one lady started setting the tent up, the other lady was walking circles around the tent, arms up to the sky, and she was praying to Yeshua. And they left. I went inside my tent, went to sleep for the night. And the next morning I woke up and I was very, very ill. I felt like I had been poisoned. I was in such a state of panic because it was just me in the tent, I hadn't really eaten anything or, how did this happen? I couldn't stand up straight. My world everything was spinning. I felt like I was going to throw up. Felt like I was like foaming at the mouth. I was very, very scared. And so I stumbled across the street and called 911 and told the officer that arrived that I wanted him to call either my dad or my brother and tell them that I was ready to get off the streets. It was like this energy, this presence that was now with me was like, this is your cutoff point. Not that I was being made to be sick, but somehow that it happened. And that was the end point for me. The police officer called my brother and my dad. They arranged for me to go to a rehab facility in another state. I was there for 4 months. And that's when things really kind of started to get even weirder. Not that there were negative things going on, but I was continuing to be brought up in these higher states of consciousness. I started channeling. I didn't even know what channeling was at the time. I still could not get on the internet. I still didn't have a phone. It was the rules, of the facility. But I was channeling, and it was kind of freaked me out. I now know that to be the channeling state. But these things were just naturally happening. Basically, they were talking to me about what was happening to me. It's almost like I was taken into little pocket realms where my earth and consciousness would think that, I was trying to figure things out. I would be given information about Stargate. Literally, I thought that I was working with the government. I thought that the government, I was so paranoid at the time and I didn't know what was happening. I thought that the government had me inside some type of program. I didn't know what Stargate was, but they were connecting it to, what I was saying. Like, I was very angry, like, stop talking to me, And so it was more, I don't even really remember. I just know that that's when I started channeling. I was connecting with spirits that had passed, that I knew. So things really started to kind of shift from there. I ended up leaving back to Texas to a different program. In total, I was in recovery for 18 months. At this new program, I would start getting visitations in my room. Lights would come into my room of all different colors. I was being regressed back to hypnosis type regression back to my childhood. I re-experienced my birth, certain times of trauma in my childhood, and the energy helped me to do this. I was able to look at myself with compassion because I was watching as these things unfolded and during my birth, during my childhood. And I knew that it was me, but I was being able to look at myself with compassion instead of self-hate that I had currently, remembered in my mind as a child. They were doing various healings on me. They would send energy to my body. They would scan it. I would feel taps like I had arthritis in my hip. I would feel taps on my hip for a long time, months and months, it felt like. I don't know if, it was a healing technique from them, if my consciousness knew and was, bringing the energy there to be healed, if I was healing myself. I really don't know. But I now am completely healed of all fibromyalgia, all arthritis. So yeah. After I got out of the recovery program, I was able to look up on the internet about all of these things and kind of put the pieces together that I had had a spiritual awakening. I mean, for 15 years, probably about 15 years prior to that, I started kind of reading near-death experience books. And I knew that I resonated with them. I knew that they were truth. And during my time on the streets, when I was communicating in spirit with these beings, I would ask them, what happened to me? Or what is going on? And they would never tell me, but they gave me the name of Melvin Morse. And I kept that name in the back of my mind until I got out of recovery and I had a cell phone. I was able to get on the internet. And that was one of the first things that I did, was look up who Melvin Morse was. I never associated him with near-death experience. Thinking back, I didn't even associate my own experience with a near-death experience. It was that foreign to me. But I looked at Melvin and I found out that he was, one of the pioneers in near-death experience research. At the time, I didn't know that who he was. I didn't know that I had read the books, years past. I had absolutely no idea until I went on his Facebook page and I clicked on his bio and all of that. And I said, oh my gosh, I've read Closer to the Light or whatever the books were. And so I messaged him and I said, this is what's happened to me. I kind of gave him the download of the story. And I said, I feel like I don't know. Was it government? They told me to contact you and that you could help. And he said, you're definitely experiencing spirit. He said, I've checked with my contacts and it definitely does not sound like government programs. And so he said, you should feel very blessed, that you've had this intervention. And so from that point on, I understood that I had as well as had a near-death experience, but a spiritual awakening. So yeah. From that point on, the channelings continued. Not only was I channeling, but I would know the beings that I was speaking to. I could kind of see them, feel them. I was getting communications from, again, spirits that had passed, family members, that type of thing. It's been a complete life changer. And the biggest thing that I've learned from it all is that we are conscious creators. Even on this, level of awareness that we're on now, that we are creating each and every day of our lives in conjunction with the energy of God within us. I have definitely learned that we have a higher self that is pure consciousness. So we have our physical mind that's here on earth, but we have a higher consciousness that is in a higher dimension that is literally guiding us. That is huge. That's one of the big things. The other thing is that all of creation is out there, that we're on the lower realm, in the darkened state, if you will. But there are beings in space-time, there's high space, and this is a place that I am very well connected to. Most of my channelings come from high space. In research, because they tell me these things and I'm like, what's high space? From what I can tell, it's higher dimensions like 9, 10, 11. Arcturians are there. Quasi-physical beings that know they've evolved to a state of living lifetimes there, but they're no longer physical as in flesh. They're more on the spirit side of it. Understanding that we're not alone is one of the bigger things, and that Hollywood portrays many things about aliens that are not true. There are negatives. There are a select few negative entities, but everyone that I've experienced has all been very love-centered, love-based, and they speak the truth to me. Anything that they speak on is from a higher, positive end of things. And so I think that the main message is that there are people that are evolving in consciousness, and that as you evolve to higher states of consciousness, the lower, ruthless, fear-based ways have to leave. And so I think that that's pretty much the majority of it. I've been told that I have fourth dimensional energies, very, very creative. Basically, you have more availability to use the energy that is you, to create, to heal, to transfer your consciousness to another dimension and experience them. That stuff is very real, yes. I've come to understand that I choose to have all interactions go through my higher self-consciousness. So I don't necessarily go outside of myself to contact beings. I'm not comfortable with it, and I truly don't understand it. I just know that my higher self guides me to first consciously connect with my higher self, and that my higher self will distribute who I contact. It's like kind of going into my higher self field and having spirit beings. Even though we consider them to be extraterrestrial, like the Arcturians, they're still very much spirit beings that are angels in high space, basically. I think that growing up Christian and the thought of Jesus being a savior for us all to immediately go to heaven is a concept that I have been shown. I have spoken with Yeshua on several occasions. That's why I don't call him Jesus anymore, because he introduced himself as Yeshua. At first, kind of, as these things, I was hearing in spirit and doing all these things. And this was just in the past year. I never spoke to Yeshua. And I'm like, I've loved him all of my life. I even asked him to come back into my life to help change my life. And I'm not hearing in spirit from Yeshua or from Jesus, at the time I called it. And so I was kind of angry, and it started to kind of mess with my head. And all of a sudden, he came to me and introduced himself as Yeshua. He's extremely funny. And I wish I would have written down the joke that he cracked, because it was hilarious. But he said, I speak through you as you. I don't need to have this external back and forth conversation with you, because I am in you. And yeah, that gave me I felt a lot of love from that, a lot of encouragement. The Crisis for Love is on Amazon. You can just search up Katie Petty on Amazon, or The Crisis for Love. That book is about my experiences with the light, my near-death experience, the realm that I went to, and my near-death or my spiritual awakening journey. And it doesn't go into a lot of the details that I was just speaking about, the channelings and that type of stuff, but it just basically tells my story. I wanted to encourage others that if you're going in through this expansion process of ascending, that there's certain things that you might go through, like, the ego death, the higher states of consciousness, understand that you are a creator and that type of stuff. So you can also find me on Facebook at Katie Petty. And I have a website, www.higherselflove.com.
This has been the A.J. Parr Spiritual Journalist Podcast. Please like, share, and subscribe.